Dark Side of the Ring ran episode 2 this past Tuesday night on Magnum TA. The first episode was on Chris and Tammy, which we reviewed last week, was really dark. This one was a little easier to watch because, Magnum TA survived his affair and his accident. He was able to walk again, live a somewhat normal life, although his wrestling career was over, and that was very tragic. He's still alive and in good spirits to this day. And I think that there's, aside from his accident, that's a very dark part of wrestling, but his story isn't necessarily dark. You know what I mean? I mean, every wrestler has their issues, their infidelity, their marriage problems, things like that. Magnum TA was no different. But when I think about all of the tragedies in wrestling, all the really, really dark careers, the traumatic lives and the tumultuous road that a lot of these men traveled down, Magnum TA just didn't seem like a guy that would need to be featured in this way. You can certainly do a documentary on his career and his tragic accident and all of that. But, I think of Dark Side of the Ring being more, behavioral driven by, whoever they're chronicling, them being crazy or fucked up or whatever. Magnum TA, I don't think really had any more problems than anybody else in the business and was actually a little bit cleaner than most. But I was not aware of the Buzz Sawyer story. I did not know that Magnum gave this guy $10,000. Back then, adjusted for inflation, how much that is now. Gave Buzz Sawyer all that money to train him to wrestle, and then Buzz skipped town on him, and he had to go track him down, and then Buzz ended up training him. He claims that Andre, another thing I didn't know, he says Andre the Giant is the one who suggested the Magnum name because Magnum TA had that mustache, and Magnum PI was a big show on back then in the 80s, and Tom Selleck was an icon in the 80s. I'm half-ass related to Tom Selleck, by the way. He's like a distant cousin of mine, true story. They talked a lot about, in the documentary, about just his unique, or I guess I wouldn't say unique, but his just great look that he had. When he first got started, they couldn't really find a look for him until they put him on a motorcycle, and they kind of gave him that, the badass country boy American look. And he pulled it off great. He was, women were going crazy for him. He had the mullet, he had the big body, he had the leather jacket, the motorcycle, the mustache. Women went nuts for him. And he had a really, really good look. And they chronicled a lot of his feuds in the NWA. Didn't talk much about the Tully stuff, but talked about the Nikita Koloff feud and all of that in the U.S. Championship, and the plans to put the title on Magnum and for him to be the one to beat Ric Flair. Those plans were in place. The sky was the limit for this guy. And then the car accident happened. And I always got confused in my head. So I thought maybe this was a motorcycle accident. It was a car accident. He was in his Porsche or whatever red car he bought, and it was raining, and he hydroplaned right into a tree and had to use the jaws of life to remove him. And they said he was going to be paralyzed and he wouldn't be able to walk again. And he was able to walk again. He was able to get out of the hospital bed and actually make an appearance in the NWA shortly after this. But he was in the hospital and ICU for a long time. They even told a crazy story how the heels had to be snuck into the hospital to see him, like Flair and Nikita and guys like that had to be snuck in at night through the back door, because even then, even in a situation and scenario as grave as this, you have to protect kayfabe. And the heels could not show any signs of sympathy or sadness for this. They had to remain straight, and that was probably pretty tough to do. And a lot of them weren't able to see Magnum because the hospital was all just crawling with fans and people there showing support and flowers and all this stuff. And for them to have to be snuck in like that to see him was pretty crazy story. But he remained in good spirits through all that, despite the fact that it's probably dawning on him and occurring to him that his wrestling career is over. And this is a guy that was set to be launched and win the World Heavyweight Championship. I personally think that big gold, that 10 pounds of gold, will look pretty damn good around the waist of Magnum TA. I thought he would have been a great champion. And they talked a lot about how he could have rivaled Hulk Hogan in the NWA. He could have been NWA WCW's version of him. And that would have been really interesting to see how that would have played out, because he would have had that Southern wrestling popularity that Dusty had, that Flair had, and the guys like that. He had, there's just a different vibe in the South. I can't describe it. I used to live there. I've been around this. I know how they are. And Magnum was just an amazing looking star for that time in that territory. It would have been interesting to see how he would have paired up with Hogan running one company and Magnum running the other, two big baby faces. I still think Hogan, just his whole just look and his size, I mean, he really did look like a superhero. Magnum was in great shape, but Hogan was ridiculous. And we all know why. And it would have been interesting to see how they would have compared. Magnum TA could have given Hogan and Vince McMahon a run for their money, but what would have happened? What would have happened when they did that? Sure, Magnum would have been world heavyweight champion, probably would have dropped the belt, probably would have won it back, probably would have been a two-time NWA champion at some point. But then, they alluded to this in the documentary. Would that success have been enough to offset the bad business decisions that the Crockett's were making that put them in the red and put them in the financial hole? And, David Crockett was on. Jim Crockett passed away recently. Davy Crockett was on the documentary, and he claimed that had those plans been set in motion and Magnum never gotten injured, that might have been enough to fend off those problems, and they wouldn't have had to sell to Ted Turner. I'm not sure. I think it's very possible that even with Magnum as champion, they still would have had those problems, and they still would have had to sell to Ted Turner. And if they did that, then you still would have had to deal with Jim Herd and all the other shit going on there, which means Magnum, like Ric Flair, could have very well left and gone to the WWE. And a lot of people said, oh man, could you imagine if Magnum TA would have gone to the WWE, the star that Vince McMahon would have made him? I don't know, maybe Hogan was there. How big of a star would he have been with Hogan there? How big of a star would Hogan have let him be? Remember when Barry Windham came in? They made him the Widowmaker. When Mark Calloway came in, he was the Undertaker. When John Nord came in, he was the Berserker. They could have brought a great talent like Magnum TA in and called him Tom Chelik or something. Vince would have done something stupid with him. It's very possible he would have put him in a stupid gimmick or just make him Biker Man or I don't know, just something generic, that it would have been up to him then to get over. So there's no guarantees that Vince would have made this guy a star, because I think what made him a star was just kind of his look and his vibe. He didn't really need a gimmick. Yeah, he had the Magnum name, but he didn't need any other crazy gimmick at all. He was just that. And that's really all he needed. I feel like Vince would have tried too hard with him, tried to do stuff with him, maybe even made him a heel, like a quiet, silent heel, instead of a charismatic babyface. And that might have been because of the political BS behind the scenes. So I'm not convinced that Magnum TA going to WWE would have automatically resulted in superstardom for him. I don't think that WWE would have pushed him like that. They might have, but I just find that hard to believe with Hogan there. It would be hard for Hogan to share a spotlight with somebody like that. Not to mention Savage and other guys there. Ric Flair coming in, Sid coming in. A lot of guys were there, and it would have been interesting to see how he would have fared in that. And then if he did not go there and he stayed in WCW, then he would have lasted there until 94 when Hogan would come in. And then instead of Bash at the Beach, Hogan and Ric Flair, it might have been Hogan and Magnum TA, and Hogan would just beat him. So I'm not convinced that Magnum would have become a bigger star than Hogan had he not gotten injured, but it certainly would have been interesting to see how he would have fared as NWA champion, especially at the same time that Hogan was WWE champion. It would have been fun to watch that play out, but that was robbed of us due to the car accident, and unfortunately Magnum TA never wrestled again. But he's remained positive and in good spirits throughout this whole thing. I mean, he's done countless interviews for WWE and documentaries. We've seen him a lot over the years, and he's made appearances, and he's always been pretty honest in his life. They interviewed his ex-wife as well, where she was honest about the infidelity and the cheating problems before he got injured, and then after his injury, they stayed together a couple of years and then split up. But he never came off once in the documentary as bitter, as angry, frustrated, miserable, anything like that. He's, open, honest, and seemed to really make the best of his situation. And I think that's great, because it is tragic and it's got to keep you up at night. It would me, knowing that, God, if I just wouldn't have driven the car that one specific way, my life would have been completely different. And that's got to be a tough thing to live with. And I commend anybody who can live with that type of regret and put on a brave face. That's pretty amazing. So it was a very, very good episode, but his entire life and career was anything but dark. It was just, that one moment. And I think what he made of his life after the accident is anything but dark. I think, I think he shines light on people who might be in a similar situation to him. He could be, good motivation and good inspiration to, just accept and make the best of your situation, no matter how horrible it is. And, I feel like that's kind of what he did in his life.